Perfect. So thanks again, everyone, for coming. Today's Coffee with the Chamber is sponsored by Marshfield Clinic. They are a proud supporter of the Heart of Wisconsin and this virtual event today. So I am just a few housekeeping items for everyone. Please keep yourself muted at all time unless you're asking a question. If you do have a question, feel free to use the chat feature or just unmute yourself. I'm very happy about our speaker for today. So Craig Broeren is the superintendent for the Wisconsin Rapids Public School District. And he is going to be talking a little bit about what is happening today in the school district regarding COVID and some other items, plus the quadplex addition as well. And he'll cover several items. And I'm going to actually let Craig kind of intro himself. So go ahead, Craig, and thank you for being here today.
All right, well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. This is the beginning of my 5th year as superintendent here in Wisconsin Rapids, and I've been involved in varying roles in education since right around 99, 2000. So this is my 22nd year in the business, as they say, and also my 12th year as a superintendent, even though I know I'm super young to have 12 years in as superintendent. That's a joke on the side, of course. And like I said, I appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation about what we got going in at WRPS. Can everybody see my screen? All right. Well, with that, we'll launch right into it. So first off, I wanted to simply mention that we've had some staffing and administrative changes this year as we headed into the 21-22 school year. Those individuals here are listed on the screen. And clearly we have a number of staff, classroom and support staff changes in the district as well. Mentioning all of those because we had over 30 this year, I think 36 or something like that, new teaching staff members joined the district this year, as well as the administrative changes. But those individuals, of course, are communicated at the classroom level with parents and kids that are involved with those staff members. We are in a circumstance like a lot of other businesses, keeping in mind that we employ right around 800 people. We're in a similar circumstance with other businesses in terms of the difficulty finding labor and also qualified individuals to perform the job. So public education is no different than any other employment sector currently, where people are struggling to find staff members and employees. And so I tossed that out because, of course, we have a number of opportunities that are in the form of both teaching roles and, of course, support staff roles and other roles within the district that sometimes become pretty difficult to fill. And it can be a struggle. And I think whatever we can do to enhance our ability to hire qualified personnel here locally is going to be a positive step, which is not any different than you're seeing in the private sector and in other sectors as well. But nonetheless, we have a few administrative changes. So Steve Hepp was the Assistant Director of People Services, and he now is the Director of People Services. The former Director of People Services took a job as superintendent down in Pecatonica, Wisconsin. And Steve's been with the district for many years. He was a special ed teacher for a long time at Lincoln High School, and then became assistant director. And then, of course, now he's the Director of People Services. For those that don't know, Pupil Services entails special ed, guidance, social workers, occupational therapy, speech therapy, so forth and so on. So it's all about the well-rounded encompassing of supporting student needs in a variety of factors. Then Betsy Van Burko joined the administrative leadership team as Assistant Director of Pupil Services. So she replaced Steve. Betsy has been a teacher, special education teacher at Mead Elementary School for several years, and is in her first administrative role this year as Assistant Director of Pupil Services. Aaron Nelson is our new Director of Business Services. For those that have been around, you probably remember Dan Wigan, our former Director of Business Services. He was with the district for many years, I want to say 24 or 26 years, and retired at the conclusion of last year. And we are lucky enough to hire Aaron Nelson, who served for, I believe, 15 years as in a similar role, although not, he didn't direct the business services portion for DC Everest. He was kind of the step just below that for many years at DC Everest, like 15. So bringing him in with his expertise in school finance and fiscal management was great. And then we have Amber Appleby, who is the new principal at Mead Elementary. Penny Antel, who was there for, I believe, 4 years, retired as well. Amber has served in a multitude of roles in the district. She was a classroom teacher for quite some time at Woodside, and then also a interventionist and effectiveness coach in the district here most recently. So she is now serving as the principal at Mead Elementary. And then lastly, the last administrative change effective for this school year is the principal at Grant Elementary. And Tim Bruns was a longtime employee, a principal in the district. He retired as well. And Nikki Calto is a former Grant staff member. She was an interventionist, also an effectiveness coach, not only in Grant, but in other buildings as well. And she's been hired as the principal at Grant Elementary. And so far, from what I'm hearing in those buildings, things are going well for the staff and the students where we have new principals in charge. All right, so moving into kind of the next topic is what's been going on in terms of the referenda. And what I've provided for you here is information that's explicitly regarding the $34 million bond issue referendum that was approved by voters last April. What is not pictured on this, but I think it's worth mentioning, is that what also was approved by voters in April was a $2 million levy override referendum for 5 years. A $2 million, well, pardon me, I should say a levy override, regardless of what the overall monetary value is. A levy override allows a school district to generate additional revenue in terms of tax dollars for the explicit purpose of whatever they lay out to voters and in the question, and have ultimately approved if in fact the voters choose to do that. And for us, what that $2 million for 5 years levy override was for is in terms of educational technology and curriculum. And so that was also approved. And that is a very similar slice to what a prior referendum approved back in 2006, 2007 by voters at that time, which at the time was a little over $1 million, 1.13 or 1.14, I believe, for 5 years. And those dollars, ironically, were being spent all the way up until, well, just before last year. Actually, there was a small pot that got kind of wrapped up at the conclusion of last year for technology-related purchases. But that the access to those dollars will allow us to continue to update various aspects of technology and then curriculum. One of the questions that might pertain to levy override dollars and technology and curricular purchases is really $2 million a year for 5 years, totaling $10 million. That's an awful lot of money. And the answer to that question is yes. And as I shared with voters prior to the election, to the referendum election back in last April in multiple informational sessions, was that we have projected expenditures just for technology updates to well over $10 million. And then, of course, you add curriculum, and curriculum purchases by year when we're purchasing for the quantity that we are purchasing for, which for Rapids here is right around 5,000 students, 5,000 to 5,100 students. You see that order of magnitude. But in general, if we're purchasing curriculum that is used, for example, in a core content area where all kids are getting something in terms of that content, so English language arts, math, science, or social studies, you can see that those numbers get pretty big just based on the number of kids that we're purchasing materials for. But anyway, those range anywhere from a few $100,000 to over $500,000 annually to make those purchases. And that's in the form of not only materials that you would get, paper kind of materials and textbooks, but also online subscriptions and some technological interfaces that are now commonplace in education, of course, in the 21st century, where it's not just textbooks and workbooks like it was back in the old days. Clearly, there's still some of that, but there's also access to websites and other curricular programming that is 100% virtual. Additionally, we have the capability of meeting kids' needs off-site, which I would argue in the pandemic in particular, particularly last year and the prior year, served us well when we were, making attempts at getting more and more in person, but still had to, based on circumstance, and I'll get more into this as we move through the presentation, but we had to shift in some cases to a virtual option. And clearly, if kids don't have a device and access to the internet as well as the appropriate content, those things are virtually impossible. However, we were fairly successful. Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We don't see your slide advancement.
Really?
So I see the screen where you would hit share or present. Yeah, do you want to hit
That's interesting.
Thanks, Maureen.
Oops. Well, my apologies. Of course, we tested it too, Angel, didn't we?
We did.
All right. You see anything now?
Yeah. So we see the Google space.
Really?
Yep. And now it's the presentation. Now try clicking through your slides.
All right. Now, if I do that, do you see the administrative positions?
Yes, that works. Sorry about that.
Well, it's interesting because I saw it just fine on my side. I don't know.
Technology. Thank you for that.
Okay. Well, it's bad that I cheated you out of this multimedia extravaganza here on the front end of the presentation, but hopefully we circle back and square it away appropriately. So now, do you see a referendum update slide?
Yes.
All right. Well, great. So now it's actually an excellent segue, because now what I'm talking about in terms of the bond issue referendum, so I've kind of encapsulated the $2 million levy override referendum. There's not much to show you in terms of graphics or something like that, but because the levy override, as I mentioned, would be purchasing curriculum and technology materials. And so I suppose I could have a picture of a computer and so forth, but nothing real earth-shattering there. But then shifting gears to what's going on in terms of the construction bond issue referendum, and that's where this slide is relevant regarding this construction process. So a bond issue referendum is different from a levy override referendum in that the bond issues are always used for some kind of construction and or renovation. So it's much like a mortgage or something like that in terms of purchasing a piece of property or a building. And in this case, it is some additions and modifications to school facilities, totaling $34 million. I will also mention really quick too, because one of the questions out there might be, what are we seeing in terms of public interest rates? And I know that there was there's been interest in what the county is doing in terms of a new jail and what the funding for that looked like. They secured very low interest rates, as did we. Basically, we're at 2% for the term of the 20-year bond, and 2% for 20 years is still, of course, some interest that you're paying on $34 million, but it is absolutely super low in terms of what we had seen historically. So if there is a good time to borrow dollars, the time actually is now. And so we're super happy about that. Anyway, so getting into the bond issue referendum, once again, $34 million, though it was presented to taxpayers and described in that bond issue question, was to renovate Lincoln High School, including a secured entrance, changing the media center, taking the library media center from the second floor, moving that to the front of the building, and then renovating that second floor, explicitly the science classrooms and associated space up there at Lincoln. And then there's also, there's also multiple aspects of that project, but getting into Lincoln, there's two phases. So as you can see under option 1A, it indicates Lincoln High School phase 1 addition. So that would be the work on the front of the building, where if you're facing current Lincoln High School, facing the entrance, the student entrance or the main entrance, directly to your left is where there's going to be a new office area added. In addition, directly to your right would be where the new student service center / media center would be located. So most of that new addition is going to come off the front of the existing Lincoln High School and take up that large paved area that's basically just a sidewalk leading all the way up to the building. You can see here dollar amounts, also estimated dollar amounts attached to those projects. The question would be, why are we adding a new office? Well, in order to make a secured entrance at Lincoln High School, and a secured entrance would be controlled, and this is true for all of our buildings. For those that are familiar with Lincoln High School, it'll make sense pretty quick, but I'll do my best to kind of describe what that looks like. So in a general sense, a secured entrance allows access to visitors and individuals to the school and access to the office only. So you're entered into a secured area, a breezeway of sorts, but of course there's no ability to get anywhere else aside from one door into the office. And in the case of Lincoln, that would be immediately to their left. Once they're allowed into the office, they go through the check-in procedure, and then they travel through the office and then into another door to gain access to the rest of the building. As it stands right now, Lincoln High School is a great example. Many of our other schools are good examples as well. But clearly at Lincoln, you can walk in that front door and you would have immediate access to the cafeteria commons area, where you have to travel through a fairly wide hallway and intentionally and purposefully go into the office. And thankfully, it is located towards the front of the building, because in some circumstances, the office, back in the old days, was put like in the center of the building, and they had good reasons for doing that at the time. But anytime we have people that are able to travel through the building or get access to a degree that we want to control it to the best of our ability. So that secured entrance aspect is inherent of where we're spending dollars in all of our facilities. But at Lincoln, it's incorporated into this first part addition. So left-hand side of the front, office area, right-hand side, student resource center. What you can see there as well is that it's broken up schedule-wise. So much of what we're doing this year currently is in terms of design, and construction was originally slated to begin sometime October, November. However, because of issues with construction material supply chain, mostly steel, that's been pushed back so that the construction of the addition is not going to begin until this spring in 22, hopefully in March. And then you'll kind of see the one just below that, phase 2 renovation, which indicates that the design process and the construction of that is going to overlap the addition portion at Lincoln. Lincoln, totaling just over $19 million, is very clearly the most complex and involved aspect of the construction and renovation process. They were hoping to avoid the overlap to the degree that we are, but in working with our construction manager and our architect and of course Lincoln High School staff, they do feel that this is an achievable and undertakeable approach. So we'll start to see some things happening this spring, including there'll be a likely opportunity of kind of a groundbreaking and just a recognition of all of the projects that we have. Additionally, you can see the third thing listed there, Think Academy. So that's Rudolph Elementary. The addition of a gym, as well as the modification of their entrance out there to be a secured entrance. So that's also slated to start sometime this spring as well. So that's a full-size gym out at Think Academy in Rudolph. We're excited about the options and opportunities that provides to the community, that side of town and that area of the school district. And then of course the secured entrances as well. The different colors on the bars that say construction are based on who the individual that will be responsible for those projects are. So anything in green is the same construction superintendent, anything in purple, same thing, and anything in orange. Because the number and complexity of the projects, they have to have multiple people on site making things happen and ensuring things are going on. And then just below that, you can see the plans for all the other elementary buildings, as well as Rams, our middle school, And those are varying degrees of developing secured entrances on those facilities. Mead also has a modification to their cafeteria area where some additional space is being added, expanding that cafeteria. So Mead also is a bit more involved than some of the other buildings. I'll point out too that as I described for Lincoln, some buildings are pretty easy to develop a secured entrance for, and some require a little bit more work. And so they would need to relocate and construct a new office area. As an example, for those that are familiar, Grant Elementary would need a new office area constructed because of where the current office is. Same thing with Washington. But if you look at Grove or if you look at Rams, they don't need a new office area because their current office area is pretty much contiguous with the front entrance. And so there can be some more minor modifications to get that secured entrance. So in general, you see what the overall estimated costs are of those projects and the overall time frame. And you can also note that we do hope to have all of the construction and renovation projects wrapped up by the conclusion of 2022, so that by 2023 we're pretty much good to go. Also listed on there at the very bottom is capital maintenance for 2.5 million, and that those items are going to be addressed as we know that dollars are available and rank ordered in terms of importance. Those things, capital maintenance, are low glamour sort of things. So think parking lots, roofs, windows and doors, standard expenses that sometimes go unaddressed because we don't have access to the dollars. Yeah, we do anticipate around 2 million, hopefully 2.5, that we can spend on other updates to capital maintenance items during the course of the accessing the referendum dollars. And then we are worked through a 20-year bond issue. So those dollars will be paid back. The bond will be paid back over the course of 20 years. I will also mention that the board here in this district has been quite aggressive in terms of when able to buy down some of the debt the district has, which frankly positioned us very well to take on this $34 million worth of debt, because based on timing, we had very little debt as this came on the rolls. And that's actually beneficial to school districts to have a certain amount of debt based on the state school funding formula, because you are aided, you receive state aid on your bond payments and what you're paying in terms of debt payments. State aid is taxes nonetheless. I'm not debating that, but they are not local property taxes. They are based off of the state collection. So of course, that being spread statewide is a much different impact on local individuals than it is in terms of property taxes. Nonetheless, in order to maximize our ability to garner dollars via the state aid formula, it does make a lot of financial sense for school districts to have some kind of debt, a certain threshold, and we're frankly well within that threshold with this new $34 million bond. And these are also projects, of course, that need to be done. One of the things that I've mentioned in my presentations and through some community conversations as well is just the idea that we have really nice facilities here in Rapids. It makes all kinds of sense, however, to take steps to incrementally improve and renovate facilities as you see fit, because one of the things that communities don't want is their schools and other facilities in disrepair or get to a crisis circumstance where now we have to do a lot of work on a lot of buildings, and lo and behold, the price tag gets much larger. So moving on, we're going to cover a lot of territory, and then of course there'll be an opportunity for questions. This is the first architectural rendering that we have of what we believe the front of Lincoln High School will eventually look like when this renovation and addition process takes place. And to orient what you're looking at here, where it says Lincoln High School on that slide, on that top graphic, that would be basically the existing front entrance. But of course, it's moved out, excuse me, further from the building. The left-hand side of what you see there, left of those doors, that would be the updated office area. To the right of those doors, that is the new Student Resource Center / Library Media Center. And then that far right open area it's contiguous with the Library Media Center, and that also opens into the existing commons. And in there are going to be flexible use spaces for student and staff use, as well as the coffee shop that's actually up in the current media center is moved down to the back corner of that and then open to the commons. So it's going to increase the usefulness of that commons / student resource center use area in that by having kind of that open space and coffee shop sort of vibe down there. Additionally, what you can see is there's well, it's tough to see, but there's a balcony in there. You can see that kind of through the glass, and there are 3 new what are going to be English language arts classrooms that are added up there. And those are being changed and moved as a result of the second floor renovations of the science classrooms. One of the questions might be, why are you moving the media center to the front of the building there? And that is because in order to accommodate the space that we need for the science classroom renovations, the existing Library Media Center square footage is taken up through this renovation process and the creation of new science classrooms. There's a couple of other learning spaces that are added up there as well, flexible learning spaces. So it's fairly comprehensive renovation of that second floor. The outer ring of classrooms is largely untouched, but there is some things that are going to transpire there to a minimal degree, and primarily the science classrooms getting updated. The science classrooms are updated because they're both out of date, being circa 79, 80. So that's issue 1, issue 2. And well, I should mention that clearly science in particular has changed in terms of approach and technology since the 80s, over 40 years ago. And so getting those updated to 21st century standards is fantastic for our students and of course our science programming. But also they were undersized, and frankly, they're undersized now, and they were likely undersized in the past, as this lab setup were built for 24 kids. And we regularly have over 24 kids in our science classrooms, to most of the time 26 or 28. Then you have issues with lab space and issues with safety. The new labs as they're constructed are going to be for 28 students. And so we know that we'll be able to accommodate the larger classes in a reasonable capacity, as well as getting those rooms updated. Just as a point, each individual science classroom, largely because of the infrastructure, so the gas lines and the power that's needed, fume hoods, those sorts of things, but also because of the cabinetry, the lab cabinetry and countertops, each science classroom is going to cost individually around $250,000. And as I said, that's just based off of the materials that are required to have it be a science lab. Then you see the northwest view and the southwest view. Again, that's the front of the building, so you get different orientations and dressing up the front a little bit. One of the things we wanted to accomplish over there is ensure that it was very apparent what the front entrance is, where the front entrance of the building is. And of course, we achieved that by having that be offset. All right. So did my slide change? Are you seeing now Wood Trust Bank Field at Southwood County 2000 Stadium? Is that what you see?
Yep, I'm seeing that.
Fantastic. So we got our act together finally. Well, shifting gears now, and I think here's an important point, and this was, we did our best to communicate this as clearly as possible. And that is that the modifications and updates at Southwood County 2000, in addition to the quadplex, which we'll get into here in a little bit, are not involved with the bond issue referendum, not involved whatsoever. They are 2 separate projects, the referendum and these 2 projects, well, actually 3 technically. And the Southwood County 2000 renovation, in addition to the quadplex, which I'll show you some rendering of here in a second, are being funded via a combination of some district dollars, and I'll get into that briefly, as well as sizable donations and advertising and marketing rights from various entities and organizations here locally. as well as contributions from individual people and or groups that want to support these projects. So again, I can't emphasize enough, separate from the bond issue referendum or the levy override referendum that was approved by voters. That was communicated in virtually every flyer that we sent regarding the referenda, and of course in every community presentation. So taking first, Southwood County 2000 Stadium and Wood Trust Bank Field. The track area was a district cost. So peeling up and renovating the track was a district cost. However, that was slated to be addressed at some point. And frankly, we probably waited a bit too long, but nonetheless, it got addressed. That cost roughly $640,000. The track was past its usable life. It was getting to a point where hosting track events eventually, probably by this year, wouldn't have been safe as a result of issues with the track. Bubbles and cracks and so forth that you normally get when you have, asphalt that's been out in the elements and in use for over 20 years. So anyway, the track was renovated. That's peeled up, new base put down, and then repaved. And then of course they added the rubberized kind of the squishy coating on the top. That's all weather surfacing, fairly standard on tracks. And it's just getting temporarily restriped for the time right now, actually, as we speak, I'm pretty sure. So that was addressed. And then when you're doing that, one of the questions would be, are we going to do anything with our football field and convert that to turf? Clearly, having a turf football field, for those of you that follow high school athletics, football, soccer, and so forth, you realize that there are a number of districts that have a turf football field. Rapids, until recently, wasn't one of them. And a reason to do something isn't just because everybody else is doing it, but I point that out because it is not at this stage uncommon for districts to have a turf football field when, back maybe 15 or 20 years ago, it was kind of uncommon. But anyway, through that shift, and I'll explain why the turf is beneficial in just a second here. But through that shift, and if you're making a modification to your track, if you're peeling that up and you're going to do something in terms of turfing your football field, clearly that would be the time to do it, because you're not going to renovate your track and then figure out how to change your football field after the fact, because you're going to cause issues and damage to your track. So because we were kind of, shopping this around in terms of these projects, the quadplex and Southwood County 2000 Stadium in a cohesive fashion, we were prepared, the district was prepared to just say, well, fine, we'll do the track and the football field will stay grass. And through some of those conversations, presentations with the legacy board and so forth, which was largely centered on the quadplex, some other connections, of course, develop and interested individuals come forward. In this case, Wood Trust Bank and the Bell Family Charitable Trust, with a sizable donation to renovate the existing grass football field to a turf stadium field to the tune of $750,000. So then clearly we have the opportunity then to see if we can't identify ways to get this project done in its entirety. And there's been some other involvement in terms of advertising and marketing on a video scoreboard that's going to be installed here at Wood Trust Bank Field relatively soon, by the end of the month, as well as some other action on the turf. In the interim, the district did commit right around $200,000 towards finishing that project off to have that come to fruition. And then, of course, there's been some marketing and advertising, as you can see in the left corner of that slide, from the Sherrill family of companies as well, that contributed towards making that happen. One of the questions would be, do you need a turf field to play football and soccer? And the answer to that question is no, which is why the involvement from the district was not in terms of, well, we really need this, for our kids, but more in terms of, it would be fantastic if there is this local commitment in terms of dollars to make this happen, namely because you can use the field almost any time. You don't have to worry about weather. You don't have to worry about, well, football was out there on Friday night, so now we got to keep people off of it because it was a little bit wet or it rained. We got to keep people off of it for at least a week so that the grass can recover and we can get back out there again. Frankly, you could play a soccer game at 4 o'clock, wrap that up and play a football game right after it with no issue. You can play back to back. You can play on it all day long and all night long. And that's one of the things that's attractive. Additionally, it's striped for soccer. So we have held a couple of soccer contests over there. It's nice to have a grass soccer field as well as a turf soccer field. It's also striped for 8-man football. That's the black stripes that you see. Why would you stripe it for 8-man football when we're 11-man? And the answer to that question is the potential of hosting things like the state 8-man football tournament. And that is, there's a strong possibility that we may be a site to host state football for 8-man, which of course brings people to the area and people to our school and facility, as well as to hotels and gas stations and restaurants and so forth here locally to spend their dollars as they're coming to watch their kid play in the 8-man state football. And so anyway, it did come to fruition. It's currently in use. There are some pieces that still need to get finalized here and put in place as far as the overall stadium process goes, including the scoreboard and some finishing up on the track. However, track will run this spring on the track with no issue, and there'll be some minor things that get taken care of here yet in June. And so that's the Wood Trust Bank Field at Southwood County 2000 Stadium. That's how we're addressing that. And over to the quadplex, and I'm looking at my time, so I'm trying to be cognizant here. If I speed up a bit, I apologize, but clearly I want to allow time for questions. But anyway, over to the quadplex, which is a separate but contiguous project. Again, not related to the referendum, but related to an overall facilities renovation. But this is what you see as a rendering of what the Rapids Area Sports Complex, 2 baseball fields. You can see that top of the screen and bottom of the screen, and 2 softball fields, fully turfed, so that same usability. Those also will have the capability of modifying where the pitching mounds are, as well as where the bases are, to allow use of those fields at any and all levels, from youth all the way up to adult use, as well as have tick marks in the outfields of the baseball fields primarily, so that they can be striped to play soccer. And you could have a pretty sizable soccer tournament occurring on the Lincoln High School grounds, and even simultaneously with things going on at Washington, which of course brings all kinds of people to town, as would a multi-team tournament for baseball or softball for both youth or adults that have the capability of bringing people to town. The quadplex overall cost is right around $8 million or so. The Legacy Foundation locally here has contributed $6.4 million towards that project, with some caveats, including that they be all turf for that, for the usability. And also pictured there is a restroom / concession facility that's in the center of that quadplex. Each field has stadium style seating. Each field has a press box, a nicely appointed and decent press box, as well as dugouts and bullpens and so forth. The what you see on the left side of the screen, towards the top and towards the bottom, those would be batting cages. And then, of course, on those fields as well, you have opportunities for sponsorships and marketing. One baseball field will be the Nakusa Port Edward State Bank Field as a result of a contribution from that entity towards making this happen. So pretty exciting project. And the idea, of course, is that we are a player in that, not it's on our property, of course. So we're going to manage and take care of that facility, but that it is for wholly and entirely community use. And we are, of course, very thankful for all of the donors that we have had, including the Legacy Foundation and others that have been very generous to make these projects happen. If you're interested in additional details around what's going on at the complex, the Rapids Area Sports Complex or Southwood County 2000, go to rapidspride.com, rapidspride.com. And on that website, they have real-time construction video. some of these same renderings, as well as donations and contributions and dollars and cents, things that that outline kind of where we're at and what the project is looking like over time. And then shifting gears completely, another relevant update to what we have going on here at the school district, of course, is unfortunately we're operating yet again another year under what we're calling, of course, pandemic circumstances, because Wood County in our area is still dealing with COVID-19. And clearly we have to engage in a certain capacity to ensure we can keep kids in school in person. The overarching goal as we headed into this year was to do exactly that. And we began the school year very similarly to how we ended last school year, except initially masks were optional 9/12. And so primarily that was Lincoln High School and River Cities High School. And the board, well, numbers changed, I would argue, fairly significantly from the beginning of August to the beginning of September. But nonetheless, the board and our administrative team had discussed the possibility of going optional at Lincoln High School, simply as a result of that entire population. Every kid and every staff member, by the time school started, would have had an opportunity to get vaccinated if in fact they chose to do so. The school district is not requiring vaccines. We are not involved in making sure people are vaccinated. That's not really our deal. I know that the county has used the East Fieldhouse as a site to have people come in for a vaccine clinic, but very clearly that is with parental consent and is not associated with the school to any degree aside from their using the facility. Nonetheless, we gave it a shot. So masks were required K-8 and were optional 9/12. And about 6 or so days into school, we had 12 positive cases at Lincoln within the first 2 weeks of school. And because of the way that guidelines, the public health guidelines in terms of quarantine and isolation are developed, they now pay deference to whether or not masks are required. And so if you are within 6 feet of a positive case without masks being involved, you are required to quarantine. What ended up transpiring is that very clearly you have a fairly high number of students that then, when there is a positive case, are impacted because of this 6-foot guidance. When you implement a mask requirement, and of course this is outlined in the procedures and so forth, that decreases to 3 feet. So common sense, I would argue, would tell you that if everybody has a mask on and you're decreasing to 3 feet, you stand the chance of decreasing your close contacts by about 50%. So initially, with masks being optional at Lincoln, he had a positive case. You might have 3 close contacts from first period and 2 from second and 4 from third. And then of course from lunch, which we still have close contacts from lunch with masks, but because of course you take your mask off for lunch. Or sports or activities, because of course kids are in contact with one another then. And what ended up happening is we had about 10% or slightly more of the student body in quarantine. That arguably goes contrary to our primary objective as we began the year, was to keep as many kids in person at school 5 days a week as possible. And so we had entertained the possibility before the board here in September of requiring masks at Lincoln, and they took action to make that happen. Subsequently, and as of yesterday, I just got some updated numbers from Ron. I'll show you where our cases are at in terms of where we ended the day yesterday here on the next slide. But we currently have around 70 students in quarantine or involved in isolation or out because of symptoms, whereas prior to the mask implementation, that was over 150 or more. And so whether we think masks are effective or not, or whether we're debating the issues associated with the virus, the guidelines as they exist through public health, developed of course from the CDC, passed on to the state DHS, and then shared with local counties for implementation. Within those guidelines, if that's how we're going to act, then We need to do our best to follow those guidelines. I'll get into that briefly. But it also results in less kids having to quarantine or being out of school. And that, I would argue, is beyond our control. We do not set the guidelines. We do not develop the guidelines. We did not, as a school district, say, hey, randomly, these are the guidelines we're going to follow. So I emphasize that because, frankly, we're at a point where whether the vaccine's effective or not, whether masks are effective or not, all of that stuff that kind of is called into question is irrelevant in terms of operating a school based on the guidelines that have been established in the expectations, because it makes sense to me that you do everything you can to keep kids in school in person, which is the best place for them. Secondarily, one of the questions might be, well, don't follow the guidelines, big deal, just do what you do. Kids sick, make them stay home. If anybody else gets sick, they stay home. The problem with that, of course, is that there is some potential liability in terms of not following guidelines as outlined by public health and kind of turning a blind eye to what our responsibility is in terms of operating a school in a safe environment for kids to attend. And so, frankly, I don't personally believe, and based on information and guidance I've seen, that we have that authority to simply flatly not follow the guidelines. Well, I should check that. Our board could absolutely say, don't follow the guidelines. But they would do so with my severe protest, and they would be provided with information that says this is not a wise idea. There are school district liability insurance carriers that are saying to their school districts, if you're not following the guidelines, you are not covered. And other things going on. And clearly this hasn't been litigated to any degree that I'm aware of at this point. But it does not make sense to be deliberately indifferent or turn a blind eye to what guidelines are. To basically pretend as though this doesn't exist and we don't need to deal with it. So of course we're going to engage as we have, at least until we get the all clear from public health to proceed or go back to normal. So that's a little bit of a diatribe around what's going on as far as mask requirement and dealing with the pandemic. And if you are familiar with how we did last year, that's basically how we're operating now. So masks are required indoors at our facilities. They are not required outdoors. Aside from that, if kids have to isolate or quarantine, we're doing our best to meet their needs off-site. So they move off-site and get their stuff virtually, with check-ins from the teacher. And then when they're free to return, they're free to return. And I would argue that it's likely going to be this way for at least the next few months, if not, longer, but we'll take it step by step. As we did last year, we're going to continue to do this year. Whenever we can make changes, we're going to make changes. And hopefully we can make changes that are more relaxing or less stringent versus, require more. But of course, that's dictated by circumstance. And then as far as numbers are concerned, so keep in mind, this is a snapshot from the end of the day yesterday. You can go to our COVID dashboard on the district website. There's a link provided, I think, COVID updates for 21-22, and then a link under that has this dashboard. And we do update this on a regular basis, usually daily. Sometimes it's a couple of, every couple of days based on staff availability. But as you can see, on the bottom right-hand corner, cumulative cases since September 1st, we started tracking once school was in session. There's been 68 district-wide. The lion's share have been at Lincoln High School with 35. Currently, we're dealing with 14 positive cases, 15 total, one staff member and 14 student cases that are active at Lincoln. And then there's a smattering of cases, through our various elementary buildings, a handful at Rams and then one at River Cities. I will note quickly too that River Cities is currently the only facility where masks remain optional at this time. But I'll point out that, as you can see, there's 102 total individuals, staff and students at River Cities. That is not 102 there during the day at any one given time because of the way the programming works at River Cities. There's a morning program, there's an afternoon program. It's very flexible for the students involved. And so it's quite rare that you even have, 70 kids in the building at any one time. Additionally, because of their facility, where they're located, and the size of the facility, they have relative ease of keeping kids 6 or so feet apart because of the low numbers and because of the space they have access to. And so for the time being, and only having to deal so far with one case, which, by the way, didn't have any school close contacts, so there was no quarantines, school-related quarantines as a result. That's palatable, and it's a reasonable approach there based on the reasons I mentioned. So with that, I know we ran the gamut of interesting topics and a wide range of things, but I will entertain any questions.
So I'll start off with a question. So thank you again so much for speaking. You did cover an array of topics, but I think they were all definitely needed to be noted. Is there anything from the business community standpoint that we could be doing to help the school district, or in support of items? Is there any way that the businesses in the community can help the school district in any way?
Well, I've said it before, and this is a community issue, right? And that's not me. I'm not scolding anybody by saying that. I'm saying that's reality. I mean, the pandemic, the virus doesn't just exist, and we don't just have to deal with it, within the building. And people with our schools, and people are going to do what they do, and I completely respect that. But I think the understanding of, look, if the overarching goal is to work within the guidelines in the safest manner as possible to keep kids in school, everybody wants to see that. I mean, it doesn't help any of our businesses if parents are having to stay home with kids because, like, 2 springs ago when we were shut down by the state, that's tough. We don't want to be in that position. We don't want kids to be out of school for any reason. And so it simply makes sense that we do as much as we can to keep kids in school. But then also that's tempered with the fact that, look, within the existing guidelines, we have to engage in a reasonable fashion for safety and for just what we're obligated to do, one would argue. So we are simply trying to do the best we can as far as a community partner is concerned. And I think deference to the fact that for the school in particular, like I said, I alluded to earlier, I'm done debating about whether or not masks are effective. It doesn't matter to me anymore whether or not masks are effective. The bottom line is, if people are wearing masks in the school environment, they don't have to quarantine unless they're less than 3 feet or have direct contact. Common sense tells you that you're going to then quarantine less kids, right? And the vaccination status, again, we don't require it. We are not involved in vaccine. It is what it is. You can get vaccinated if you want. If you are vaccinated, you don't quarantine. I didn't develop that. The school board didn't develop that. That's what the CDC guidelines state. So I think the understanding that we are simply a player in this that is impacted, clearly by what's going on in the community. We're doing what we can with the idea of keeping kids in school. And I think that's our obligation.
Thank you for elaborating on that further. We'd like to open the floor up for any kind of questions. Feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question, or if you're more comfortable, feel free to drop it in the chat feature and I can read those off to Craig. So I'll give anyone a second if they need to unmute or if they'd like to put that in the chat feature.
Craig, this is Dan Paulson. Question, do you know what the percentage of your high school students are that are vaccinated? Do they turn in their card? Do you just ask for it, or is that completely anonymous?
That's a great question, Dan. So do we directly know the answer to that? The answer is no, but the county, so anytime an individual gets vaccinated, it goes into something called WRPS, Wisconsin Immunization Registry System. That, of course, has got nothing to do with us, but most of the time we recognize that via, measles, mumps, rubella, the state required vaccinations you need to have in order to, register your kid and have them attend school. And of course, there's exemptions from those, but without getting too much into the weeds in that realm, that's existed in the state for many, many years. And I don't think Wisconsin's an outlier in that regard, because there are certain vaccinations that are required for school. As it stands right now, the COVID-19 vaccine is not required for school. The state's not requiring it, nor is the district. Nonetheless, any vaccine that you get is put into WRPS. And so we know, or the county knows, a percentage of individuals in certain age groups that have been vaccinated in a general sense. We don't collect that information in a cohesive sense, but what we do is, if you are a close contact, or if you're, you say you're positive, our staff will say, hey, have you been immunized? And of course, they're not required to answer, but the kid or the parent can say, yep, they were. And then our staff will typically say, Can we verify that in words, because it has to be verified? And if the parent says, nope, we don't want you looking at that, then we'll typically turn it over to the county public health, and public health will look at it and then tell us who has to quarantine and who doesn't. Not necessarily who's vaccinated and who is not, right? Initially, school staff were going to have to turn it all over to public health because it appeared as though with the existing DHS and school district agreements in terms of access to WRPS, that school staff couldn't look at COVID-19 vaccination status, but that was updated by DHS. So now technically we could look to see whether or not a student or staff member is vaccinated. Most of the time, you know, if they are, it's like, yep, I am, and you can verify in WRPS, so we do. And the reason being is that if you are, then of course you don't have to quarantine, at least under the existing guidelines. So what I'm telling you, Dan, is that we simply take it on a case-by-case basis. And if information is not willing to be shared, we turn it over to the county. The county has authority to check, and then they let us know how to proceed.
Any other questions for Craig?
Hey, just one comment, Craig, Sean Becker here. Just wanted to thank you for the nice presentation on the athletic complex. Getting the opportunity to coach Lincoln High School football, it's an honor to be part of it. And the kids are, you know, just love the field. And to see that change over the last year is just, it's been awesome. So thank you, you know, to all the community support, and thank you for your support, Craig, to make that happen. It's a huge difference out there. And again, thanks. I just want to make that comment.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, clearly these projects and, well, everything that we got going, you know, there isn't much that we do in a school district that's isolated from the community. So it is all with the community spirit in mind, and use, and getting people on our facilities, and involving community groups, even the sheriff's department, Sheriff Becker. Yeah, we don't mind if you guys are, that's a joke, of course. Big fans of law enforcement, our law enforcement partners, but yeah, anything we can do, because my attitude and our board's attitude is that, you know, we're a community entity. So we want people on and using our facilities, clearly.
All right, I'll do one last call for questions before we wrap up. Anyone else have any questions for Craig? All right, well, thank you again, Craig, for speaking today for Coffee with the Chamber. Our next segment will be with Kyle Kearns from the City of Wisconsin Rapids, giving an economic development update. I will be sure to send that information out along with the video recording that we have for today. We want to thank our sponsor for today, Marshfield Clinic, a proud supporter of the Chamber and our virtual Coffee with the Chamber. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful day.